What if I told you that some of the darkest deeds in human history were written down, not by a villain, but by a priest? A man sent to the New World, who was so horrified by what he saw, he risked everything to expose it. He wrote letters, he published a book, all detailing the unimaginable cruelty inflicted upon the native peoples by the Spanish colonists. The words you are about to hear are his. They are a first-hand account of a paradise lost and a people destroyed. And fair warning, they are not easy to listen to. What you will hear is only a fraction of the truth. We begin. The year is 1492. A year later, the first Christian settlements are established by the Spanish. It has now been 49 years since their ships began arriving in this part of the world. They first landed on the vast, fertile island of Hispaniola, a place with a massive coastline, surrounded by other large islands. And as I have seen with my own eyes, these lands were as densely populated as any place on earth. By 1541, more than 10,000 leagues of the mainland coast have been explored, and more is discovered every day. This coastline was also teeming with people. It seemed as if the Almighty chose this part of the world to be home to the vast majority of the human race. And God created these people, however numerous, to be the most open and innocent imaginable. They are the simplest people in the world. Imagine waking up not to an alarm, but to the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. The air is warm, the sounds are familiar, the chatter of your village, the rustle of palm leaves. You are among a people crafted to be gentle, humble, and patient. You feel no ambition for worldly possessions, no greed. Your diet is as simple as that of the desert fathers. You sleep on a mat of woven straw, perhaps in a hammock slung between two trees. Your mind is innocent and pure, yet sharp and intelligent, making you receptive to learning new truths. Now, picture newcomers arriving. At first, you believe they have descended from the heavens. You welcome them, but soon the illusion shatters. These men, since the first day they saw your people, have attacked like ravenous wolves, like tigers and wild lions that have not eaten meat for days. And this has not changed. They have done nothing but tear your people apart, kill them, burn them, and inflict misery never before seen. The numbers alone tell a horrifying story. When the Spanish first arrived, the native population of Hispaniola was approximately 3 million. Today, only 200 remain alive. The island of Cuba is now desolate. Two other large, beautiful islands, Puerto Rico and Jamaica, have been similarly ruined. Not a single living soul has been left on the islands of the Bahamas. These 60 islands were once as fertile as sacred gardens. Now there is only death. The native population of the Bahamas, once around 500,000, was exiled and annihilated. A God-fearing man undertook an expedition to find those who had escaped the Spanish net to save their souls. But after a 3-year search, he found only 11 survivors. I saw them with my own eyes. 11. On the mainland, we know for a fact that the cruelty of the Spanish has depopulated a region that was once home to many kingdoms, each larger than the entire Iberian Peninsula. This entire area, once teeming with people, is now a wasteland for more than 2,000 leagues. That is a longer distance than traveling from Seville to Jerusalem and back. A conservative estimate suggests that the despotic and diabolical behavior of the Christians over the Comanche last 40 years has led to the unjust deaths of more than 12 million souls, including women and children. I, however, believe the number exceeds 15 million. The Spanish who came here eradicated these poor people in 2 ways. First, by waging unjust, cruel, and bloody war. Second, by enslaving the women and children left behind, subjecting them to every kind of torment. Let's talk about Hispaniola. It was the first place to witness the arrival of Europeans, and the first to experience the wholesale slaughter of its people and the devastation of its land. It all began when the Europeans took native women and children as servants and to satisfy their own vile desires. Soon, they were not content with what the locals willingly offered. They began to forcibly seize all the food the natives produced. The amount one European consumed in a single day could feed 3 native families of 10 for a whole month. As the newcomers inflicted other hardships and assaults, people began to realize these men had not truly descended from the heavens. Some started hiding their food, others hid their women and children, and some fled to the hills to escape the brutal persecution. Imagine you have fled to the hills, but there is nowhere to truly hide. The newcomers, the Christians, find you. They beat the weak, pull their ears, and whip them. This shameful process culminates when one of the European commanders rapes the wife of the island's chief. It is then that the natives begin to think of ways to drive the Europeans from their lands and take up arms. But their weapons are weak and ineffective, both in attack and defense. With their horses, swords, and lances, the Spanish easily repel them and commit all sorts of atrocities. They storm their towns and massacre everyone they find, small children, old men, pregnant women, and even women who have just given birth. They tear them to pieces, splitting their bellies with their swords as if they were slaughtering sheep. They even make bets on who could split a man in two with a single blow. Picture this scene, if you can stomach it. They snatch nursing infants from their mothers' breasts by their feet and smash their heads against the rocks. Laughing and joking, they throw the babies into the river, shouting, "Writhe, you little wretch." They slaughter everyone in their path. Sometimes they impale a mother and her baby with a single sword thrust. They spare no one. They build wide gallows where they hang their victims with their feet just above the ground. Then, in honor of Christ and the 12 apostles, they gather them in groups of 13 and burn them alive, or tie dry straw to their bodies and set them on fire. They cut off the hands of some and leave them alive, telling them to take a letter in their mouths as a warning to those hiding in the forests. The usual method for native leaders is to tie them to a grill of rods and roast them slowly over a fire, letting them howl in agony and despair. One of these kings was named Maguana, which means Kingdom of the Plain. This plain was one of the wonders of the world, stretching 80 leagues from the island's southern coast to its northern shore. Another was Siguayo, whose king was Gerionix. Under him were several extremely powerful local leaders. For example, one of them had 16,000 men under arms, all at Gerionix's command. I met some of these men personally. The king himself was a virtuous man, calm and devoted to his duty, and very fond of the king and queen of Spain. For several years, by his command, every household in his kingdom had given an annual gift of a hollow gourd filled with gold. But the natives knew little about mining, and when they later found less gold, the king simply reduced the offering to half a gourd. To respond to the endless demand for gold, Gerionix correctly stated that his people knew little of mining, and he made a different offer. He proposed to open up a large part of his kingdom to agriculture for the Spaniards' use. Had he been able to do this, it could have generated enough income to build great cities. However, the evil-hearted European commanders dishonored this good man by taking his wife and raping her. In response, the king could have gathered an army for revenge. Instead, he chose to abdicate the throne and go into exile alone. When the Europeans realized he was gone, they formed an army to find him. They attacked the local leaders under his protection. Even native kings who had served the Spanish crown so much could not protect their own lives. He was replaced by a ruler named Anacona. When the Spanish governor of the island visited this kingdom with his soldiers, he summoned over 300 local leaders to welcome him. The governor tricked the unsuspecting leaders into gathering in a thatched building and then ordered his men to set it on fire, burning them alive. Everyone else was massacred, either impaled with spears or put to the sword. Queen Anacona herself was hanged. When one or two Spaniards tried to save some children, either out of pity or perhaps because they wanted them for themselves, other Spaniards came up from behind and ran them through with spears. Another member of the governor's retinue galloped by, slashing the legs of all the children lying on the ground. The governor ordered that even those who had fled to a small island 8 leagues away to escape this bestial cruelty should be condemned to slavery for having escaped. The 5th kingdom on Hispaniola was known as Higi, and its queen was an elderly lady named Higonama. They hanged her. I saw with my own eyes the Spanish burning countless natives alive, dismembering them, or inventing new ways to torture them to death. They invented so many new methods of murder that it would be impossible to put them all on paper. No matter how hard one tried, one could not list even 1,000th of what actually happened. After the conflicts ended and all the men were killed, the survivors were divided among the victors. One received 30, another 40, a third 100 or twice that, all depending on how much they could please the despot who held the title of governor. The pretext for this was that their new masters would teach them the Christian faith. And so, a crowd of men, most of them as ignorant, brutal, and greedy as pigs, became the owners of these poor souls. The enslaved men were sent to the mines to dig for gold under horrendous conditions. The women were put to work in the fields, tilling the soil and growing crops on their masters' lands. This was work suited only for the strongest of men. Both men and women were given only weeds and other non-nutritious food. The milk of young mothers dried up, and their babies died. Since men and women were separated and never saw each other, no new children were born. The men died in the mines from overwork and starvation. The women died in the fields in the same way. This island, once inhabited by so many people, began to perish. Imagine being forced to carry loads weighing as much as 3 or 4 carts on your back for up to 200 leagues. Your Christian masters lie in hammocks slung on your shoulders. You are treated like a beast of burden. Just like overloaded animals, huge sores form on your shoulders and back. And this does not even count the whippings, beatings, punches, curses, and countless other torments you are routinely subjected to, cruelties that no chronicle can do justice to, that no reader can react to with anything but horror and disbelief. It should be noted that the devastation of this island's lands began when the news of our most gracious Queen Isabella's death arrived in 1504. Until then, only a small number of provinces had been destroyed, not the entire region. The news of this destruction was largely hidden from the Queen, for she took a close personal interest in the well-being of the native peoples. We who lived through those years can testify to this. There is another general rule in all of this. Wherever the Spanish set foot in the Americas, they subjected the native peoples to these same cruelties. They murdered these poor and innocent people. They tyrannized and oppressed them in the most disgusting way imaginable. The longer they stayed in a region, the more God seemed to abandon them, allowing them to practice evil. Their new tortures and techniques became more brutal, each one more ruthless than the last. In 1509, the Christians reached Puerto Rico and Jamaica, 2 lush islands flowing with milk and honey, with the same purpose as before. Here they repeated the same atrocities. They even found ways to refine their cruelty. They killed the native people, burned them, roasted them, and threw them to wild dogs. They crushed them with heavy labor in the mines. They placed large stones on them and waited for them to die. Thus, the native population of these 2 islands, which was over 600,000, and I personally estimate it was more than 1 million, was reduced to fewer than 200 survivors. In 1514, a governor landed on the mainland. This man, who descended upon the region like the wrath of God, was the cruelest of tyrants, completely devoid of mercy and even common sense. He was determined to settle the entire region with Spaniards. The mainland had already witnessed despots who had plundered and killed the local population. But their injustices had so far been confined to the coastal areas. This person, however, surpassed all his predecessors. He displayed a cruelty that exceeded even those who had wreaked havoc on the islands. His diabolical actions surpassed all the abominations that had occurred before. Moreover, he did not limit his attention to the coast. He carried out great massacres in the interior, driving out the natives, killing right and left, and sending everyone he encountered to hell. He devastated a distance of more than 500 leagues, where some of the most fertile and densely populated regions of the known world were located. This was a region of many great lords and countless large cities. Never before had such a great wealth of gold been discovered on earth. Although Hispaniola had filled Spain with the finest gold, all of it had to be extracted from the depths of the earth by the labor of the natives who toiled in the mines, and, as we have said, died there. This governor and his men developed entirely new torture techniques to torment the native population, to force them to reveal the locations of their gold and surrender it. A Franciscan friar, Francisco de San Ramon, personally witnessed an expedition organized by the governor for the purpose of stealing everything. His report shows that this expedition alone caused the deaths of more than 40,000 natives. These people were killed in various ways, put to the sword, burned alive, thrown to wild dogs, or had their arms and legs torn off while they were still alive. The Spanish policy towards the New World has been characterized from the very beginning by a most harmful kind of blindness. Although regulations stated that the conversion of the natives and the salvation of their souls was the first priority, this contradicted what was actually happening. A gap between theory and practice meant the local population was presented with an ultimatum: either adopt the Christian religion and swear allegiance to the crown of Castile, or no mercy would be shown. They would be massacred or taken prisoner. It is as if the Son of God, who sacrificed himself for every living soul, had intended that pagans, living in peace in their own lands, should be forced to convert instantly, without ever having heard the Christian doctrine explained to them. And if they showed reluctance to do so, and to swear allegiance to a king they had never heard of, a king whose emissaries were cruel and bloodthirsty tyrants, they had to immediately surrender all their worldly possessions. They would lose all rights to their lands, their freedom, their women, their children, and their lives. Such a thought is as foolish as it is absurd, and it deserves only contempt. This vile governor was tasked with announcing the terms of this law. But when they learned there was gold in a town, they would approach at night, read the terms only among themselves so no one else could hear, and then burst into the town in the early hours. While the poor people were still innocently asleep with their families, they would set fire to the houses, which were usually made of straw, and the victims would burn to death without understanding what was happening. Imagine you're in a village. You've heard rumors of gold. Then, one day, men on horseback arrive. A captain, under the authority of the governor, has a new way to get information. He captures a local lord, one who gifted him 9,000 Castilians of gold, and ties him to a post. He lights a fire under the man's outstretched feet, demanding more gold. The man's feet cook until the marrow runs from his bones, and he dies. Another time, a troop of soldiers on a raiding party finds a large number of natives who have fled to the mountains to escape the reign of terror. They surprise the fugitives and kidnap 70 to 80 women and young girls, killing many of the men. The next day, the survivors regroup and pursue the soldiers, worried for their wives and daughters. The soldiers, not wanting to be slowed down, draw their swords and stab the women and young girls in the stomach, killing them all. The native men, beside themselves with grief, tear at their own flesh and shout after them, "You cruel Christians, you are killing the Iris." In the local language, the word IRA means woman. By shouting this, they meant, killing women is a cruel abomination, and clear proof that you are no different from savage beasts. About 10 to 15 leagues from Panama lived a lord named Paris, who had a large amount of gold. When a group of Europeans arrived, he welcomed them like long-lost brothers and gifted their captain 50,000 Castilians of gold. To the captain and his men, someone who could give such a large gift must be very rich. Since their main reason for being there was gold, they pretended to leave, only to return at midnight and set the buildings on fire. They killed and burned many natives and stole another 50 or 60,000 Castilians of gold. The local lord himself escaped with his life and pursued the soldiers with as many men as he could gather. Within 2 or 3 days, he caught up with them and their loot, worth 130 to 140,000 Castilians of gold. He and his men fought bravely, killing 50 of the Christians, seriously wounding many others, forcing them to flee and recovering all the gold. Later, a large Christian force attacked this lord, massacred him and many of his people, and enslaved all the survivors. They too soon perished. So much so that today, there is no trace of this community that once ruled over an area of 30 leagues. The devastation and slaughter spread by this evil Spanish governor in the region was so great that an accurate record can no longer be compiled. Today, the entire region is abandoned and desolate. In 1522, the same terrible tyrant set out to annex the fertile province of Nicaragua. It was impossible to express in words the beauty and fertility of this region, its healthy climate, and the prosperity of its countless people. The sheer number and size of the towns were truly astonishing. A town could be 3 to 4 leagues from one end to the other, and the abundance of local produce was enough to support a large population. The land here was flat and without hills. There were no mountains where the natives could hide. At the same time, the people had no intention of leaving this beautiful place. So they stayed and endured the soldiers' oppression, the atrocities they committed, and the slavery they imposed on them as best they could. These people were also naturally kind and not aggressive. This despot and his companions destroyed this region, just as they had destroyed the others. They engaged in the same excesses, the same senseless destruction, the same wholesale slaughter, the same atrocities. Indeed, it is beyond human capacity to compile an accurate record of the murders, cruelties, and unjust imprisonments they committed. The governor sent 50 horsemen, and these men proceeded to destroy the entire population of an area larger than the province of Roussillon. They spared not a single man or woman, old or young, and did so on the flimsiest of pretexts. They accused their victims of not coming quickly enough when summoned, of not bringing enough corn, or of not surrendering enough of their relatives as slaves. Since the land was flat and the Spanish had horses, not a single one managed to escape. The enslaved natives were also forced to pull and carry heavily loaded carts. Of the 4,000 native porters on one such journey, not even 6 ever saw their homeland again. And when a native porter grew tired, completely exhausted from the immense load, the lack of food, and the inability to rest, the soldiers would cut off his head from his shoulders so as not to break the chain of prisoners. His head would fall to one side of the line of goods, and his body to the other. You can imagine the effect this had on his suffering comrades. And in time, when the townspeople realized that no one ever returned from such journeys, the conscripted natives would begin in tears, sighing and wailing their fate, saying, "The roads we travel and the work we do are hard, but we thought we would return to our homes, our wives, and our children. That hope is now a thing of the past. We know that this journey will be our last." Once, either on a whim or because he wanted to take them from some friends and give them to others, the governor decided to redistribute the slaves. As a result of this turmoil, the natives did not have the opportunity to plant their fields, and not enough grain was grown. The Christians seized all the corn the natives had grown for themselves and their families, and as a result, 20 to 30,000 natives starved to death. In addition, the enslaved elderly and even children were forced to work day and night until they died of exhaustion to make up for the missing harvest. and they continued to use pregnant women and new mothers as beasts of burden. The treatment they meted out to the natives in this regard was even worse than in Hispaniola. The most insidious calamity this governor devised was the system of licensing the Spanish to demand slaves from the native chiefs and nobles. This development devastated that country as nothing else had. Every 4 or 5 months, a person could receive permission from the governor to demand 50 slaves at a time. The demand always came with the threat that if the required number was not provided, the noble would be burned alive or thrown to wild dogs. Slavery was almost unknown among the local population. Even the local chiefs had at most 2 or 3 slaves. So at first, the Spanish gathered all the fatherless children they could find. Then they might ask any family with 2 children to hand over one, and a family with 3 children to bring 2. But the people here loved their children far more than people in other parts of the world. Therefore, every demand for slaves was made amidst wails and gnashing of teeth. Experience shows that these people die very quickly after being taken from their homeland, especially since they were forced to go without food while working full days. The only thing on the minds of those who bought and sold them was the desire to find new slaves. In this way, more than 500,000 poor souls, each as free as you or I, were taken from their homeland. On top of that, another 500,000 to 600,000 people have been killed so far, either during the hellish conflicts or as a direct result of the terrible conditions. All this destruction has taken place in the last 14 years. Today, in the entire province of Nicaragua, once one of the most densely populated places on earth, only 4,000 or 5,000 people remain. And every day, some of them die from the heavy labor and personal abuse they are subjected to. For more stories that dive into the strange and mysterious corners of history, join me on the channel. You won't want to miss what's coming next.